Promise me, little star. When the darkness comes, you remember who you are. The memory of her mother's dying whisper cut through Ivy McCrae like a blade as the rope burned against her wrists. Sand scoured her face in the howling wind, but nothing could drown out the mob's bloodthirsty chants. Hang the thief. Devil's spawn. Should have done this years ago. 17 years old and already marked for death. The wooden stake pressed against her spine as Mayor Cyrus Red raised his whip, his pale eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Behind him, Helen Graves fanned the crowd's fury with calculated precision, her red lips curved in a cold smile. Any last words, girl? Red's voice carried over the storm. Ivy lifted her chin, the silver locket at her throat, catching what little light pierced the dust cloud. Her mother's final gift, her mother's final words. Remember who you are. I'm innocent. The words came out steady despite her terror. And someday you'll all know it. Red's laughter was like breaking glass. Innocent, you robbed the bank, killed Marshal Peterson, and seduced half the town's boys. The evidence: thunder, hoofbeats. A rifle crack split the air. Through the sandstorm rode a figure on a painted horse, long black hair streaming behind him like a war banner. Tahan Black Elk's weathered face was stone, but his dark eyes blazed with deadly purpose as he leveled his Winchester at the crowd. Anyone touches her, I start shooting. The mob scattered like startled birds. Red's face twisted with rage as he recognized the Sioux scout. Black Elk. You've got no authority here, Redskin. This girl's a murderer. Then let her face a proper trial. Tahan's voice carried the weight of mountains. Not your twisted justice. Helen Graves stepped forward, her silk dress untouched by the dust. $20 to whoever brings him down. Tahan's lips curved in a humorless smile. He pulled a second rifle from his saddle and tossed it to Ivy with deadly accuracy. The ropes around her wrists, severed by his earlier shot, fell away. You know how to use that, girl. Ivy caught the weapon muscle memory from her mother's secret lessons flooding back. Better than they think. The crowd hesitated. Armed, she was no longer prey. This isn't over. Red snarled as Tahan backed his horse toward Ivy, never taking his aim off the mob. We'll hunt you both down like the animals you are. Tahan reached down, and Ivy grasped his outstretched hand. In one fluid motion, he hauled her up behind him. Hold tight. They thundered into the storm, leaving chaos and fury in their wake. But as the town disappeared behind them, Ivy couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The silver locket burned against her skin, and her mother's voice echoed in the wind. Remember who you are. The abandoned mining camp materialized from the dust like a ghost town. Weathered buildings leaned against each other for support, their windows dark as dead eyes. Tahan guided his horse through the empty streets with the confidence of familiarity. Safe house, he said, dismounting near a sturdy cabin that looked less decrepit than the others. Used to supply copper to the railroad before the vein ran dry. Ivy slid down her legs, shaking from adrenaline. Why did you save me? Tahan studied her face in the fading light, and something flickered in his dark eyes. Because I know what it's like to be blamed for something you didn't do. Inside the cabin, he lit a lantern and began checking supplies. Ivy noticed the way he moved, economical, purposeful, like a man accustomed to danger. Scars crisscrossed his hands and forearms, and she glimpsed what looked like old bullet wounds beneath his shirt. They say you killed your wife, she said quietly. His hand stilled on the water barrel. They say a lot of things. Did you? He turned to face her, and the pain in his expression was answer enough. Mary died 3 years ago. Found her body in Red's mine shaft, beaten to death. The marshal ruled it an accident, but... He shook his head. The wounds were too deliberate. Someone wanted her to suffer. Why would they blame you? Because I'm Lakota. Because she was white. Because someone needed a scapegoat. His voice hardened. Same reason they tried to hang you today without a trial. Ivy fingered her mother's locket, feeling the worn edges of the engraved star. My mother used to say Gulchwater was cursed, that something evil lived in its heart. Your mother was a smart woman. What happened to her? Fire. The word came out barely above a whisper. 5 years ago. The boarding house where we lived burned down. They said it was an accident, but she met his eyes. She'd been asking questions about missing girls, about why so many orphans disappeared. Tahan's expression darkened. And then you became an orphan. Helen Graves took me in, said it was charity. Ivy's laugh was bitter. I was 13, scared, grateful. Didn't realize she was grooming me until it was almost too late. But you escaped. Barely. The night before my 16th birthday, I overheard her talking to a man about selling me to buyers from Denver. High price for innocence, she said. Ivy's hand moved unconsciously to her throat where faint scars marked an old injury. I tried to run. Helen caught me, held a knife to my throat. Told me no one would believe a whore's daughter over her word. How did you get away? Dr. Harrison. He was treating one of Helen's girls that night, heard the commotion. Created a distraction that let me escape. Her voice softened with gratitude. He's been helping me survive on the streets ever since. Brings me food, medicine when I'm sick. Says it's what any decent person would do. Tahan nodded slowly. Harrison's a good man in a bad town, but even good men have limits. Outside, the wind howled through the empty buildings like the voices of the dead. Ivy pulled her worn shawl tighter and tried not to think about tomorrow. Tried not to wonder how long they could run before Red's men found them. They'll come for us, she said. I know. Tahan checked his rifle, ejecting cartridges to inspect them in the lamplight. But we won't make it easy. Why are you helping me, really? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, haunted. Because 3 years ago I failed to save someone who mattered. I won't fail again. Mary, his wife. Ivy saw the grief etched in every line of his face and understood. They were both survivors of Gulchwater's cruelty, both marked by loss. Perhaps that was enough for now. As she settled onto a dusty bedroll, Ivy's fingers found her mother's locket again. The metal was warm against her skin, almost as if it carried some residual heat from her mother's love. She pressed it to her lips and made a silent promise. I'll remember who I am, Mama, and I'll make them pay for what they took from us. Dawn brought no peace, only the thunder of approaching hooves. Tahan was already awake, crouched by the window with his rifle ready. Through the dusty glass, Ivy could see at least a dozen riders spreading out to surround the camp. Red's men, Tahan murmured. And some I don't recognize. Hired guns, probably. Ivy checked her weapon, grateful again for her mother's secret lessons. How many ways out? 3. Back door leads to the mine entrance. Window faces the old smelter. Front door? He shrugged. Front door's suicide. A voice boomed across the camp, amplified by a speaking trumpet. Black Elk, we know you're in there. Send out the girl and we'll make it quick. Tahan's jaw tightened. That's not Red. Frank Morrison, bounty hunter from Denver. Helen must have put a price on your head. How much am I worth? Dead or alive, I'd guess 500, maybe more. The number hit Ivy like a physical blow. $500 was more money than most people in Gulchwater saw in a year. Half the territory would be hunting her. There's something else, Morrison called out. Something about your family, girl. Something Helen wants you to know before you die. Ivy's blood turned to ice. My family's dead. Maybe. Maybe not. Tahan's voice was grim. Helen's playing games, trying to draw you out. Your mother left something behind. Morrison continued. A letter. Names of the men who really killed her. You want to know the truth, you come out with your hands up. Ivy started toward the door, but Tahan caught her arm. It's a trap. What if it isn't? What if there really is a letter? Then we'll find another way to get it. But walking into their guns won't bring your mother back. A new voice cut through the morning air, younger, nervous. Miss McCrae, it's Dr. Harrison. I'm here to help. Ivy's heart leaped. Through the window, she could see the doctor's familiar figure standing apart from the bounty hunters, his medical bag in hand. He came, she whispered. I knew he wouldn't abandon me. But Tahan's expression was troubled. Something's wrong. Harrison's smart enough to know this is a trap. Why would he? The doctor's voice carried again, strained and urgent. They have the letter, Ivy. Your mother hid it in my office before she died. It names the real killers. Ivy's hand tightened on her rifle. I have to know. Wait. Tahan studied the scene outside with the eye of an experienced warrior. Look at Harrison's position. He's standing too close to Morrison's men. And his bag, see how he's holding it, away from his body like it's heavy. You think they're forcing him? I think they're using him as bait. Same as the letter story. As if summoned by their suspicion, Helen Graves emerged from behind one of the buildings. Even at a distance, her red dress stood out like a bloodstain against the brown landscape. She raised her own speaking trumpet. Ivy, darling, I know you can hear me. Dr. Harrison has been very cooperative, but I'm afraid his usefulness is coming to an end. The threat was unmistakable. Ivy's stomach clenched as she watched two of Morrison's men flank the doctor. She'll kill him whether I surrender or not, Ivy said. Probably. But if we're smart, maybe we can save him and get some answers. Tahan moved to the back window and pointed toward the mine entrance. The tunnel system connects to the main mine under Gulchwater. I explored it after Mary's death looking for evidence. If we can reach the entrance, we can get behind them, or get trapped underground. His smile was grim. But sometimes you have to choose between bad options and worse ones. Outside, Helen's voice rose again. I'm giving you 1 minute to decide, dear. Then Dr. Harrison's blood will be on your conscience. Ivy looked at Tahan, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. They were both done running. The mine it is. They gathered their weapons and what supplies they could carry quickly. As they slipped toward the back door, Ivy caught Tahan's arm. Thank you for believing in me. Something shifted in his expression, a warmth that transformed his weathered features. Your mother would be proud. The words carried more weight than he could know. For a moment, Ivy felt her mother's presence like a protective embrace. Then gunshots erupted outside, and they were running for their lives again. The mine entrance yawned before them like a mouth to hell. But hell was what they knew. Hell was where they learned to fight. Time to take the battle home. The tunnels beneath Gulchwater were a labyrinth of shadows and echoes. Tahan led the way with a miner's lantern, its weak light barely penetrating the oppressive darkness. Behind them, distant shouts indicated that Morrison's men had discovered their escape route. This passage connects to the main mine, Tahan explained as they hurried through a narrow tunnel. From there, we can reach the basements under Main Street. Ivy tried not to think about the tons of earth above their heads or the way the tunnel walls seemed to press closer with each step. How do you know these mines so well? Spent months down here after Mary died, looking for clues, trying to understand what happened. His voice carried the weight of old grief. Found more than I bargained for. What do you mean? They reached a wider chamber where several tunnels converged. Tahan held up the lantern illuminating the walls. Ivy gasped. Carved into the rock were names, dozens of them, some fresh, others worn by time. Missing girls, Tahan said quietly. The ones your mother was asking about. Someone's been keeping a record. Ivy approached the wall with growing horror. She recognized some of the names girls who'd supposedly run away or died in accidents or simply vanished. At the bottom of the list, carved in fresher stone, was a name that made her blood freeze. Ivy McCrae. They've been planning this, she whispered. Planning to kill me and add my name to their collection. Tahan's jaw tightened. We need to move. The sound carries down here and A rifle shot cracked through the tunnels, followed by Morrison's voice echoing off the walls. "We know you're down there. These tunnels all lead to dead ends. Surrender now, and maybe the girl lives long enough to see trial." Tahan blew out the lantern, plunging them into absolute darkness. "They're splitting up, covering the exits. Can we get to Dr. Harrison? Maybe. The tunnel under the medical office connects to this system, but it means going deeper through the flooded sections. Water, Ivy's greatest fear after fire. But the thought of Dr. Harrison in Helen's hands was worse than drowning. Lead the way." They felt their way through the darkness, hands trailing along the rough walls. The air grew cooler and damper as they descended. Soon Ivy could hear the sound of dripping water, then the splash of their boots in shallow pools. "The water's rising," Tahan murmured. "Recent rains. This section floods fast." As if summoned by his words, a rumble echoed through the tunnels. Somewhere above them, men were dynamiting the entrances. "They're sealing us in," Ivy realized. "Helen's work. She'd rather bury us alive than risk us escaping with what we know." The water was knee-deep, now shockingly cold. In the distance, they could hear the roar of a flash flood racing through the lower tunnels. If they didn't reach higher ground soon. "Are there?" Tahan's hand found an iron ladder bolted to the tunnel wall. "Service shaft to the medical office. Climb." Ivy's fingers closed around the rusty rungs just as the flood waters surged around them. The current tried to tear her away, but Tahan's strong hand steadied her from below. "They keep going. Don't look down." Up and up they climbed through the narrow shaft, their lungs burning in the stale air. Below them, the water continued to rise, carrying away everything in its path. When Ivy's head finally struck wood, she nearly sobbed with relief. "Trapdoor," Tahan panted, "should open into Harrison's basement." The door was locked from above, but a few kicks from Tahan's boots splintered the wood. They hauled themselves into a cluttered basement that smelled of medicinal herbs and carbolic acid. Above them, floorboards creaked under the weight of footsteps. Voices drifted down Helen's honeyed tones and Dr. Harrison's strained replies. "I told you I don't know where they went." "Oh, doctor." "Still lying to protect that little whore." Helen's laugh was like ice cracking. "Morrison's men found the tunnel entrance. They're trapped like rats down there." "You're making a mistake. Ivy's innocent." "Innocent." Helen's voice sharpened. "She's a bastard child who should have died with her whore mother. But don't worry, I'll correct that oversight soon enough." Ivy's hand tightened on her rifle. Beside her, Tahan checked his weapons with grim efficiency. "How many?" he whispered. Ivy listened carefully to the footsteps above. 3, maybe 4. Helen, 2 of Morrison's men, and someone else. The someone else could be Red. Or Yellowhawk, if we're lucky. Yellowhawk? Lakota warrior. My cousin. He's been tracking Helen's operation for months. Tahan's expression was fierce. If he's here, the odds just shifted in our favor. They crept up the basement stairs, each step carefully placed to avoid creaking. At the top, Tahan eased the door open a crack. Through the gap, Ivy could see Dr. Harrison tied to a chair in his examining room. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but his eyes were alert and angry. Helen stood beside him, idly stroking a silver-handled knife. "Last chance, doctor. Where did you hide the letter?" "What letter?" Helen's knife flicked out, opening a shallow cut on Harrison's cheek. "The one Sarah McCrae gave you before she died. The one that names her killers." Ivy's breath caught. Her mother really had left evidence. "Sarah never gave me any letter," Harrison said steadily. "Liar." Helen raised the knife again, but froze as a new voice cut through the room. "Put the blade down, Helen." Morrison stepped into view, but something was wrong. His gun was trained not on the doctor, but on Helen herself. And behind him, Yellowhawk emerged from the shadows, like a ghost, his own rifle leveled at Morrison's remaining men. The bounty hunter's face was stone, but Ivy caught the subtle hand signal he flashed toward the basement door. "Friend, what are you doing?" Helen demanded. And what I should have done years ago. Morrison replied. Yellowhawk made me an offer I couldn't refuse. Justice for my daughter. Helen's face went white. Your daughter ran away to Denver. My daughter's name is carved on a wall in those tunnels. Morrison's voice was deadly quiet. Along with 23 others, including Sarah McCrae. The revelation hit Ivy like a thunderbolt. Sarah McCrae, her mother, was on the list of Helen's victims. Tahan's hand found her shoulder, steadying her. Together, they slipped into the room as Yellowhawk and Morrison secured Helen's remaining men. Dr. Harrison, Ivy said softly. The doctor's eyes widened as he saw her. Ivy, thank God. I thought the explosions were harder to kill than Helen thinks. Ivy cut his bonds while keeping her rifle trained on Helen. Is it true about the letter? Harrison rubbed his wrists, wincing. Your mother came to me the night before she died. Said she'd learned something terrible about the missing girls. She gave me a package, told me to hide it somewhere safe. Where? The church. Inside the old Bible behind the altar. He looked at Helen with disgust. Sarah discovered Helen's trafficking ring. Names, dates, buyers, everything. Helen laughed, the sound brittle and desperate. You think a dead woman's scribblings will matter? Red owns this town. Owns the law. That letter is worthless. Maybe, Tahan said quietly, but it's a start. Yellowhawk spoke for the first time, his English heavily accented but clear. Federal marshals are coming. Telegraph sent 3 days ago. Evidence will matter to them. The color drained from Helen's face. You're bluffing. Am I? Yellowhawk's smile was predatory. Maybe you should ask your boss. Oh wait, he's already fled town, left you to face the music alone. Red was gone. The revelation should have brought satisfaction, but Ivy felt only a hollow ache. Justice delayed was still justice denied. We need that letter, Morrison said. And we need to get these people to safety before Helen's remaining men regroup. But as they prepared to leave for the church, Helen's desperate laughter stopped them cold. You want to know the truth, the real truth? Her eyes glittered with malice. Ask your protector there about his dear departed wife. Ask him why Mary Black Elk was really in those mines. Tahan went rigid. What are you talking about? She was there to meet someone. Someone she'd been seeing for months behind your back. Helen's smile was poisonous. Your precious Mary was a whore just like all the others. The words hung in the air like a curse. Ivy saw the pain flash across Tahan's face and felt her heart break for him. But before anyone could respond, Helen made her move. In one fluid motion, she drew a hidden derringer from her sleeve and pressed it to her own temple. If I'm going down, I'm taking my secrets with me. The gunshot echoed through the room like thunder. Helen Graves crumpled to the floor, her secrets dying with her. But as the smoke cleared, Ivy realized the real revelations were just beginning. The church sat at the end of Main Street like a weathered sentinel, its bell tower piercing the gray morning sky. As they approached, Ivy couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. The streets were too quiet, the windows too dark. Something's wrong, Morrison muttered, checking his rifle for the 3rd time. Yellowhawk nodded toward the church steps. Fresh tracks, many horses. They were here recently. Tahan hadn't spoken since Helen's revelation about his wife. His face was carved from stone, but Ivy could see the turmoil in his dark eyes. She wanted to offer comfort, but the words wouldn't come. What could she say that Helen was lying? They both knew better than that. The letter first. Dr. Harrison said quietly. Whatever else happens, we need that evidence. The church door stood ajar, creaking softly in the wind. Inside, dust motes danced in colored light from the stained glass windows. The altar looked undisturbed, the massive Bible still resting on its carved stand. But as Ivy approached, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The Bible was open to revelations that someone had underlined a passage in red ink, and he opened the bottomless pit. And there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace. The message, Yellow Hawk observed. They know we're coming. Dr. Harrison reached behind the Bible and withdrew a leather package wrapped in oilcloth. Still here, Sarah hid this well. With trembling fingers, Ivy unwrapped her mother's final gift. Inside were 3 items, a letter in her mother's careful handwriting, a list of names and dates, and a photograph that made her gasp. The photograph showed a group of men standing outside the Silver Dollar Saloon. She recognized Mayor Red and several town officials. But it was the man standing next to Red that shattered her world. Dr. Harrison, younger but unmistakably him. This can't be right, she whispered. Harrison's face had gone pale. Ivy, I can explain. You were one of them. The accusation came out flat emotionless. You were part of Helen's ring. Was. Past tense. Harrison's voice was heavy with shame. 5 years ago, I was a different man. Gambling debts, drink compromised in every way that mattered. Helen owned me, including the night my mother died. The doctor's silence was answer enough. Tahan's rifle swung toward Harrison with lethal precision. Start talking. Now. Your mother discovered the trafficking operation by accident. She was working as a cleaner in Red's office, found the ledgers. Helen sent me to handle the situation quietly. Ivy's vision blurred with rage. You killed her. No. Harrison's voice cracked. I went to warn her to give her a chance to run. But she refused to leave without proof. Insisted on copying the ledgers first. He ran shaking hands through his hair. Helen must have suspected. She sent men to the boarding house while your mother was still inside. You let them burn her alive. I tried to save her. But the fire spread too fast and Harrison broke off, tears streaming down his face. I've spent every day since trying to atone. Helping you, gathering evidence against Helen, sending word to the federal marshals. I'm the one who contacted Yellow Hawk. Morrison studied the photograph with professional interest. This evidence would have hung them all. Why didn't you use it sooner? Because I'm in it too. Using this evidence would have meant confessing to my own crimes. Harrison looked at Ivy with desperate eyes. But watching you grow up, seeing your mother's courage in you, I couldn't stay silent anymore. Yellowhawk suddenly tensed, hand moving to his knife. We're not alone. The church doors slammed shut with a thunderous boom. Through the windows, Ivy could see armed figures surrounding the building. But these weren't Helen's men or local toughs. These were professional killers. Federal marshals, my ass, Morrison growled. These are Red's cleanup crew. A voice echoed through the church, amplified by a speaking trumpet. Come out with your hands up, you're surrounded. But it wasn't Red's voice. It was older, more cultured. Familiar in a way that made Ivy's skin crawl. Judge Blackwood, Dr. Harrison whispered. Helen's business partner. The territorial Judge Morrison looked stunned. But he's supposed to be in Denver. Guess he came back early, Tahan said grimly. He was already moving toward the windows, checking angles and sight lines. How many? 20, maybe more. Yellowhawk had positioned himself near the altar where the elevated platform gave him a clear view of all approaches. Professional spacing. They know what they're doing. Blackwood's voice boomed again. Dr. Harrison, I know you're in there. Bring me the McCrae evidence, and we can discuss terms. Ivy clutched her mother's letter to her chest. The words on the page seemed to burn through the paper. Judge Blackwood is the true power behind the trafficking ring. He provides legal cover and selects the victims. Red is just his puppet. He's not here to negotiate, she said quietly. He's here to bury the truth along with all of us. As if to prove her point, smoke began seeping under the church doors. They were going to burn them out. Back exit, Morrison asked. Tahan shook his head. Blocked. I can see men positioned there too. Bell tower. Possible. But it's a long drop and they'll pick us off as we come down. The smoke was getting thicker. Soon they'd have to choose between burning and being shot. Ivy looked around the church, desperately searching for options. Her gaze fell on the altar again, and suddenly she remembered something from her childhood. The crypt, she said suddenly. There's a crypt under the altar. My mother used to clean down there sometimes. Yellowhawk was already examining the floor behind the altar. Stone slab here. Recent scratch marks around the edges. Together, the men managed to pry up the heavy stone, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was cool and musty, but free of smoke. Where does it lead? Harrison asked. Only one way to find out. Ivy replied, already starting down the steps. The crypt was older than the church above its walls, carved from the living rock. Ancient graves lined the walls, marked with names worn smooth by time. But it was what lay beyond the graves that gave them hope. A tunnel roughly carved, but clearly recent. Bootleggers, Morrison observed. This connects to the old mine system, or it's another trap. Tahan said grimly. Above them, the sound of splintering wood suggested their pursuers had grown tired of waiting. Smoke was beginning to filter down through the cracks in the floor. Trap or not, it's our only chance, Ivy said. They plunged into the tunnel just as the first gunshots echoed through the church above. Behind them, the sanctuary where her mother had once prayed was becoming an inferno. Ahead lay only darkness and uncertainty. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Ivy felt something other than fear. She felt her mother's presence guiding her steps, leading her toward a truth that would either damn them all or set them free. The tunnel branched ahead, offering multiple paths. Yellowhawk studied the floor carefully, reading signs invisible to the others. This way, he said, pointing left. Fresh air. This leads outside. But as they followed his lead, Dr. Harrison suddenly grabbed Ivy's arm. There's something else, he whispered urgently. Something I didn't tell you about the night your mother died. What? She wasn't alone in the boarding house. There was someone else there, someone who escaped. Ivy's heart stopped. Who? Your sister? The words hit her like a physical blow. Sister? She had a sister. Where is she now? Harrison's face was grim in the dim light. That's what we need to find out. Because if she's still alive, she's the only other witness to what really happened that night. Behind them, shouts and gunfire suggested their pursuers had found the crypt. Ahead, the tunnel continued into unknown darkness, but now Ivy had something more than evidence to fight for. She had family, someone who might still be alive, still be saved. And God help anyone who tried to stop her from finding the truth. The tunnel emerged into a moonlit ravine 2 miles from town. They crouched among the scrub brush, catching their breath and checking for pursuit. In the distance, orange flames licked at the church spire. Judge Blackwood was making sure nothing remained of their meeting place. Sister. Ivy repeated, still struggling to process Harrison's revelation. How old? What was her name? Rose. She would have been about 12 when the fire happened. 13 now. Harrison winced as he adjusted his position, favoring an injured leg. Your mother kept her hidden most of the time. Said it was safer if people didn't know about her. Why? Because Rose saw things. Remembered faces. Your mother was terrified that Helen or Red would realize what the girl knew. Tahan scanned the horizon with practiced eyes. They'll have patrols out soon. We need to move. Where? Morrison asked. Every hideout in the territory will be watched. Yellowhawk pointed toward the distant mountains. My people's land, sacred ground. Even Blackwood's men won't follow us there. That's a day's ride, Harrison protested. I'm not sure I can. You'll make it, Ivy said firmly, because you're going to help me find Rose. They moved through the night like ghosts, following game trails and dry creek beds to avoid the main roads. Yellow Hawk led with the silent skill of his ancestors, while Morrison brought up the rear, watching for signs of pursuit. Tahan stayed close to Ivy, his presence both comforting and troubling. She couldn't stop thinking about Helen's cruel words about his wife. The pain in his eyes had been real devastating. But there had been something else there too, a flicker of recognition, as if he'd suspected the truth all along. "Tahan," she said quietly as they paused to rest near a rocky outcrop. "What Helen said about Mary doesn't matter now." His voice was flat, emotionless. "It matters to you." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his words were barely above a whisper. "I knew she was seeing someone. Found letters, saw the way she looked when she thought I wasn't watching." He stared into the darkness. "I told myself it was my imagination, that she was just restless, unhappy with our life." "Did you confront her?" "The night before she died. We fought. Said things." He shook his head. "Last words between us were angry ones. She left to cool off, never came home." Ivy felt a stab of sympathy for this man who'd saved her life. "You can't blame yourself for what happened." "Can I? If I'd been a better husband, if I'd paid more attention, she'd still be dead." The harsh truth came from Morrison, who'd been listening from the shadows. "I've seen Helen's work before. Once she marked someone for death, there was no saving them." "You knew about the trafficking ring?" Ivy asked. "Suspected. But I had no proof, and Helen had protection from Blackwood." Morrison's face was grim. "My daughter Lucy disappeared 3 years ago. Officially a runaway. But I knew better. That's why you changed sides. When Yellow Hawk told you about the names on the tunnel wall. Lucy Morrison, age 14. Morrison's voice cracked. "Carved right between 2 other girls I'd helped search for. Girls whose families begged me to find them. They were all connected by loss," Ivy realized. "All survivors of Gulchwater's cruelty, united by their need for justice." As dawn broke over the mountains, they reached the reservation boundary marked by ancient stone cairns. Yellow Hawk spoke briefly in Lakota to a group of warriors who'd been tracking their approach, and soon they were led to a hidden camp in a sheltered valley. The tribal elder, a weathered man named Standing Bear, listened gravely as Yellow Hawk explained their situation in rapid Lakota. His dark eyes studied each member of their group before settling on Ivy. "He wants to see the evidence," Yellow Hawk translated. Ivy carefully unwrapped her mother's letter and handed it to the elder. Standing Bear read slowly, his expression growing darker with each line. When he finished, he spoke briefly to Yellow Hawk. "He says your mother was a warrior woman, that her death demands justice." Yellow Hawk's voice carried the weight of ancient traditions. "But first we must prepare for battle." "What kind of battle?" "The kind that ends with Blackwood and his men dead or captured. Standing Bear has sent runners to the federal marshals. They will arrive in 3 days. And until then, we hunt." Yellow Hawk's smile was predatory. "Starting with your sister." Dr. Harrison had been examining a map of the territory marking known hideouts and safe houses. If Rose survived the fire, Helen would have taken her somewhere secure. Somewhere she could be controlled but kept alive. As leverage, Tahan suggested. Or as a future asset. Girls that young. Helen would wait until they were older before selling them. The casual brutality of it made Ivy sick. But it also gave her hope. If Rose was being held for future use, she might still be alive. The old Cartwright Ranch. Morrison said suddenly. 30 miles north of town. Helen bought it last year through a shell company. Claims it's for cattle, but I've never seen any livestock. Yellow Hawk nodded. Good place to hide things. Remote defensible. My people have seen strange activity there. Standing Bear spoke again, his tone urgent. Yellowhawk's expression darkened as he listened. "What is it?" Ivy asked. "Smoke signals from our scouts near town. Many men riding north, toward the Cartwright place." The implications hit Ivy like a physical blow. "They're moving the girls, or they're cleaning house," Morrison finished grimly. "Eliminating witnesses." Tahan was already checking his weapons. "How long to reach the ranch?" 4 hours hard riding," Yellowhawk replied. "But they have at least an hour head start." "Then we'd better ride fast." As they prepared to leave, Standing Bear approached Ivy and pressed something into her hand. It was a small carved stone, warm from his touch. "Ni. He says this carries the strength of your ancestors," Yellowhawk translated. "Your mother's spirit will guide you to your sister." Ivy closed her fingers around the stone, feeling its weight like a promise. Rose was alive. She had to be. And if God was merciful, they'd reach her in time. But as they rode out of the valley toward an uncertain fate, Ivy couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part of their journey was just beginning. Behind them, smoke still rose from the burning church. Ahead lay the Cartwright Ranch and whatever horrors waited there. Between them and justice stood Judge Blackwood and his army of killers. It was going to be a long day. The Cartwright Ranch sprawled across a barren plateau like a festering wound. Through his spyglass, Tahan counted at least 30 men positioned around the main house and outbuildings. Smoke rose from a chimney, suggesting the buildings were occupied. Too many," Morrison muttered. "Even with Yellowhawk's warriors, we're outnumbered 3-1. Numbers don't matter if we're smart about this," Ivy said, studying the layout. "What's that building on the far side, the one with the barred windows?" Dr. Harrison squinted through the glass. "Looks like it used to be a bunkhouse. Helen must have converted it into quarters for the girls. Prison cells." The words hung unspoken in the air. Yellowhawk pointed to a dry creek bed that wound around the eastern edge of the property. "Good cover. We could get close without being seen." "And then what?" Morrison asked. "Storm the place, guns blazing. Those girls will be caught in the crossfire." Ivy felt the carved stone in her pocket warm against her fingers. An idea was forming, dangerous but possible. What if we don't storm it? What if we make them come to us? The men looked at her with varying degrees of skepticism. "Explain," Tahan said. "Blackwood wants the evidence destroyed and all the witnesses dead. But he also wants to do it quietly, without drawing federal attention." Ivy's mind was racing, pieces clicking into place. What if we offered him a trade? The evidence for the girls? He'd never honor that deal. "I know. But he'd bring them out for the exchange away from the fortified buildings. That's when Yellowhawk's warriors strike." Morrison was shaking his head. "Too risky. You'd be walking into a trap." "We're already in a trap. At least this way we might save some lives." Yellowhawk studied the ranch through the spyglass again. It could work. But someone would have to get close enough to make contact. Someone they wouldn't immediately shoot. All eyes turned to Dr. Harrison. He was the only one Blackwood might still consider an ally. "I'll do it," Harrison said quietly. "After what I've done, it's the least I can offer." "They might kill you on sight," Tahan warned. Maybe. But if there's a chance to save those girls..." Harrison's voice strengthened. "Your mother died trying to protect the innocent. I won't dishonor her memory by doing less." They spent an hour working out the details. Harrison would approach under a white flag, claiming to have escaped from town with the evidence. He'd offered to trade it for safe passage and the release of the girls. The exchange would take place in the open ground between the ranch and the creek bed, where Yellowhawk's warriors would be waiting. It was a desperate plan with a dozen ways to go wrong. But it was the only chance they had. As Harrison prepared to leave, Ivy caught his arm. "Doctor, thank you for everything you've done since my mother died." His eyes were bright with unshed tears. I just pray it's enough. They watched him walk across the open ground toward the ranch, a white handkerchief tied to his medical bag. Halfway there, riders emerged from the buildings to meet him. Even from a distance, they could see the tension in the encounter. He's talking to them, Yellowhawk observed. They're listening. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the riders escorted Harrison toward the main house. Soon after, a group emerged from the converted bunkhouse. The girls? Morrison breathed. Through the spyglass, Ivy could make out a dozen figures in simple dresses, their hands-bound faces pale with fear. One of them was smaller than the others, with dark hair that caught the sunlight. Rose, Ivy whispered. Her sister was alive. Thin, frightened, but alive. The procession moved slowly toward the designated meeting spot. Judge Blackwood himself rode at the head of the group, his black coat and silver hair, making him look like a carrion bird. Behind him came Harrison and a dozen armed guards. The girls were herded along like livestock. Remember, Yellowhawk said to his warriors, wait for my signal and watch for crossfire. We can't risk hitting the prisoners. The exchange party reached the meeting point. Blackwood's voice carried across the open ground, though his words were indistinct. Harrison held up the leather package containing the evidence, but kept it well out of reach. Smart man, Tahan murmured, making them come closer. But something was wrong. Instead of negotiating, Blackwood was gesturing angrily. His men were spreading out, taking defensive positions. He's not planning to trade, Morrison realized. He's setting up for a slaughter. Yellowhawk raised his hand, preparing to signal the attack. But before he could move, the situation exploded into chaos. Harrison suddenly lunged forward, pressing something against Blackwood's chest. There was a flash, a crack like thunder, and both men went down. Smoke bombs began detonating around the exchange party, creating a thick cloud that obscured everything. Now, Yellowhawk shouted. Warriors rose from the creek bed like avenging spirits, their war cries splitting the air. Gunfire erupted from all directions as Blackwood's men tried to regroup in the chaos. Ivy didn't wait for orders. She was running toward the smoke, toward her sister, her rifle ready. Behind her, she could hear Tahan shouting her name, but she didn't stop. The smoke was thick as soup, choking and disorienting. Shapes moved like ghosts through the haze, armed men fleeing girls' fallen bodies. Ivy followed the sound of crying, of terrified voices calling for help. Rose, she called out. Rose, it's Ivy, I'm here. A small figure stumbled out of the smoke, hand still-bound face streaked with tears. Dark hair, brown eyes, and a face that was like looking into a mirror of her younger self. Ivy. The voice was thin, disbelieving. Is it really you? It's me, sweetheart. I'm here. Ivy cut Rose's bonds with her knife, then pulled her sister into a fierce embrace. I'm never letting you go again. Around them, the battle raged. Yellowhawk's warriors were systematically eliminating Blackwood's men, but resistance was fierce. The judge himself was nowhere to be seen, either dead or fled. The others, Rose said urgently. There are other girls. We have to help them. Together, the sisters moved through the smoke, gathering the scattered prisoners. Most were young, all were terrified, but they were alive. As the smoke began to clear, Ivy could see the full scope of the victory. Blackwood's men were dead or surrendering. The ranch buildings were secure. And Dr. Harrison, she found him lying near the center of the exchange point, his chest torn open by the explosion that had taken down Blackwood, but he was still breathing, still conscious. Did we get them? He whispered as she knelt beside him. We got them, all of them. He smiled, blood flecking his lips. Your mother would be proud. Those were his last words. As Ivy closed his eyes, she felt a presence beside her. Tahan, his face grim, but relieved. It's over, he said quietly. Is it? She looked around at the carnage, the rescued girls, the smoking ruins of Helen's empire. Blackwood. Yellowhawk found pieces of him near the explosion site. Harrison must have triggered some kind of bomb. A final act of redemption. The doctor had paid the ultimate price to ensure the monster couldn't escape justice. But as they gathered the survivors and prepared to leave the ranch, Ivy realized their ordeal wasn't quite finished. In the distance, she could see riders approaching, not federal marshals. Morrison announced after studying them through his spyglass. Looks like they got Yellowhawk's message. Justice was coming to Gulchwater at last. But for Ivy and Rose, huddled together among the rescued girls, it felt more like a new beginning than an ending. They were sisters survivors and finally free. 6 months later, Ivy stood on the porch of the rebuilt boarding house watching the sun set over Gulchwater. The town had changed dramatically since that bloody day at the Cartwright Ranch. Federal marshals had swept through like a cleansing fire, arresting corruption wherever they found it. The old Silver Dollar Saloon was now a school. The mayor's mansion had been converted into an orphanage, and the building where Helen Graves had once trafficked young girls now housed a clinic run by a new doctor from Denver. Rose emerged from the house behind her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. At 18 now, she had grown into a remarkable young woman, strong, compassionate, and utterly unbroken by her ordeal. "The Morrison girl is settling in well," Rose reported. "She'll need time, but I think she'll be okay." Morrison himself had stayed in town after the marshals finished their investigation, working to reunite the rescued girls with their families or find them safe new homes. It was his way of honoring his daughter's memory. And the others? 3 more went home to their families last week. That leaves 5 still with us, but they're making progress. The boarding house had become something neither Ivy nor her mother had ever imagined, a true sanctuary for those who had nowhere else to go. They'd funded it with the reward money from Blackwood's capture and the seizure of his criminal assets. Ivy. She turned to find Tahan approaching from the street, his hat in his hands. He looked different. Lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Tahan, I wasn't expecting you back so soon. Federal Marshal had some final questions about the investigation. But there's something else." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Something I need to tell you both." Rose excused herself with a knowing smile, leaving them alone on the porch. Ivy gestured for Tahan to sit beside her on the steps. "What is it?" "I found out the truth about Mary, about why she was at the mine that night." Ivy's heart clenched. Even after all these months, the subject was still painful for him. "You don't have to." "I do. Because it changes everything." He looked at her with eyes that held both sorrow and something else. Something that made her pulse quicken. She wasn't there to meet a lover. She was there to meet your mother. The world seemed to tilt. What? Mary discovered some of Blackwood's correspondence while cleaning the judge's office. Your mother was already investigating the missing girls. They were working together, sharing information. Ivy felt tears pricking her eyes. Helen's lie about the affair was just that, a lie designed to hurt me, to make me doubt Mary's memory. Tahan's voice was thick with emotion. "My wife died a hero, not a betrayer." They sat in silence for a moment, letting the truth settle between them. In the distance, the church bell rebuilt after the fire tolled the hour. "There's something else," Tahan said quietly. "Something I've been wanting to tell you for months." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a worn photograph. It showed a young Lakota woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile standing beside a younger Tahan. "Mary," Ivy said. "Yes, but look at her more closely." Ivy studied the photograph and her breath caught. The woman's features, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile. There was something familiar about them. Something that reminded her of, "She looks like me," or "You look like her." Tahan's voice was barely a whisper. "Because Mary wasn't just my wife, Ivy. She was your aunt." The revelation hit her like a thunderbolt. "My aunt, your mother's older sister. They were separated as children when your grandmother died. Mary was adopted by a Lakota family raised as one of us. Your mother grew up in the white world, never knowing what happened to her sister. Ivy's mind reeled. But how do you know? Mary's tribal name was Morning Star. She told me once that her birth name had been Sarah Star, but she'd had a younger sister named after the dawn. A sister named Aurora. Aurora, her mother's real name. Ivy felt the pieces of a lifelong puzzle clicking into place. They found each other, she whispered. After all those years, they found each other. Only to be killed for trying to protect others. Tahan's hand found hers warm and strong. But their daughters survived, and their daughters have a choice to make. What kind of choice? He turned to face her fully, his dark eyes holding depth she'd never seen before. Mary and I never had children. I've spent 3 years thinking I'd die alone, that my family line would end with me. His voice grew husky. But if you'll have me, if you'll let me be the father I should have been from the beginning, maybe we can honor both our mothers' memories. The proposal hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying and perfect. Ivy thought of her mother's dying words, "Remember who you are." She was Aurora McCrae's daughter, Mary Black Elk's niece, a survivor, a fighter, a woman who'd learned to build hope from ashes. "Yes," she said simply. Tahan's smile transformed his weathered features, making him look years younger. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Yes, we'll be a family." She laughed through her tears. "But I'm keeping my name. McCrae means something now." "Ivy McCrae Black Elk," he said, testing the sound. "I like it." As if summoned by their joy, Rose appeared in the doorway with a grin that could have lit the entire territory. "About time," she announced. "I was starting to think you'd never work up the courage." "You knew?" Ivy asked. "Sister, I've watched the way you two look at each other for months. Even the blind could see it." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the peaceful evening. In the distance, Ivy could see Yellow Hawk approaching with several other tribal members, probably coming to discuss the upcoming harvest celebration that would unite the town and reservation communities. It was going to be a good life, she realized. Not perfect, they all carried too many scars for that, but good. Built on truth, strengthened by love, and dedicated to protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ivy felt her mother's presence like a warm embrace. The locket at her throat seemed to pulse with gentle heat, and she could almost hear Aurora's voice on the wind. "Remember who you are, little star. You are loved, you are strong, you are home." And finally, wonderfully, she was. But their story wasn't quite finished. As they sat together on the porch, watching the peaceful town settle into evening, a young woman approached from the street. She was perhaps 16, with hollow eyes and clothes that had seen too many hard miles. "Excuse me," the girl said hesitantly. "I heard this was a place where people help each other." Ivy rose, immediately recognizing the desperation in the girl's voice. "What's your name, honey?" "Emma. Emma Cartwright." The name sent a chill through all three listeners. "I'm looking for my sister. She disappeared 2 years ago, and I've been searching ever since. Someone in the next town over said you might know something about girls who go missing." Rose and Ivy exchanged a look full of understanding. Their work wasn't done. It might never be done. But that was okay. They'd learned that hope was a flame that grew brighter when shared. "Come inside, Emma," Ivy said gently. "Let's get you fed and cleaned up, then you can tell us everything." As they led the girl into the warm light of the boarding house, Ivy caught Tahan's eye. He nodded once, understanding passing between them without words. Tomorrow they'd start looking for another missing sister. Tomorrow they'd begin another rescue. Tomorrow they'd prove once again that even in the darkest corners of the world, family could be found and love could triumph. Tonight, though, they'd simply give a lost girl a safe place to rest. In Gulchwater, that was how miracles began. with one person choosing to care about another, one hand extended in kindness, one light kindled against the darkness, the way it always had, the way it always would, the way Aurora McCrae had taught her daughters it should be.